What if someone you loved disappeared without a trace? No warnings, no explanations, just a chilling silence where answers should be. One day they're here, the next they're gone. What happened? Did they run away? Were they taken? Are they still out there somewhere waiting to be found? Mysterious disappearances sometimes defy logic and haunt the imagination. From cryptic last messages and bizarre sightings to clues that only deepen the mystery. In this video, I hope to highlight 3 of the most perplexing cases so far. So let's dive in. My first story is not only one of a tragic death, but also of the enduring love of a father who spent years trying to get justice for his daughter and just refused to give up. Julie Ward was a 28-year-old publishing assistant from Bury St Edmunds in the UK. She was also a keen amateur wildlife photographer who regularly used to travel to pursue her hobby. One of her trips, which unbeknown to everyone would be her final one, took place in 1988. On this occasion, she had travelled to Kenya at the beginning of the year on a 7-month wildlife photography excursion. At the beginning of September, her trip was almost at an end, and she was preparing to return home within a week. At the time, she was living in the capital, Nairobi, but had made one last trip to the Masai Mara Game Reserve. Julie was hoping to capture some photographs of the great wildebeest migration that took place every year. It was one of nature's major spectacles. She made the trip accompanied by her Australian friend Dr. Glenn Burns, but on the 5th of September the jeep they were using broke down. Dr. Burns elected to return to Nairobi, but Julie decided to stay at the Mara Serena Lodge until the vehicle was repaired. Once this was done, on the 6th of September, Julie drove to a nearby campsite at Sand River to collect some of her camping equipment. And this, sadly, would be the last time she was seen alive. When Julie failed to return from the reserve, she was officially reported missing. Her father, John Ward, upon hearing the worrying news, flew straight out to Kenya to search for his daughter. He hired a plane to assist with the search, and on the 13th of September, the plane sighted Julie's vehicle in a gully. John Ward went out to investigate, and in a horrifying turn of events, he found Julie's mutilated and burned body in the ashes of a fire close by. Some reports say that Julie's body had the appearance of having been mutilated with a machete. But when an official investigation was launched by Kenyan authorities, they were quick to suggest that she had been attacked by wild animals, and then they said, struck by lightning. Now, this was dismissed by John Ward, who pressed for a more in-depth investigation, but officials appeared reluctant. It seemed they feared it might harm the country's tourism industry. It took a full year for Julie's death to be classified as a murder. During this period, the Kenyan coroner's report was called into question, and after a British pathologist concluded that Julie had been dismembered with a machete, the Kenyan authorities were accused of tampering with the original report and of a cover-up. Indeed, John Ward went so far as to accuse the Kenyan President Daniel Arap Moi of being involved in some way. John Ward made over 150 trips to Kenya to try to get to the bottom of his daughter's killing, but was met with obstruction after obstruction. In a more sinister turn of events, at one point the president's son, Jonathan Moi, was suspected of the killing. It was rumoured he'd been having an affair with Julie. And then in 2004, many years later, a Kenyan intelligence officer was reported to have stated that Julie was repeatedly raped before being killed, and that possibly Jonathan might have been involved. This was a possible reason for her body being burned, I guess, to cover up forensic evidence. But Jonathan Moi died in 2020 without ever being charged. In 1990, the UK Foreign Secretary ordered an investigation by Scotland Yard which suggested that 2 park rangers were responsible for the killing. But after a trial, the men were acquitted. Then in 1998, the chief park ranger himself was accused and again tried. Yet again, he was acquitted. Now, it is widely known that John Ward blamed Jonathan Moy, the president's son, for the rape and murder of his daughter. But sadly, both he and his wife Jan died days apart in 2023, never having given up their fight to expose a high-level cover-up of Julie's death. Their sons, Bob and Tim, vowed to continue their work, but it seems that the truth may now never be uncovered. What seems clear, though, is that there was also some involvement by MI6, the Secret Intelligence Service of the UK, and this was admitted by a former agent. Does this point to the UK government of the time having knowledge of or even participating in the cover-up? I'll leave you to ponder that. We now come to an unsolved case from 1985. 21-year-old Diana Robertson and her boyfriend Mike Riemer lived in Puyallup, Washington, USA, with their daughter Crystal Louise. The couple had known one another for about 4 years, and Mike's winter job was as a fur trapper. On the 12th of December 1985, all 3 of them set out to spend a day in the mountains near Tacoma. Mike wanted to check his traps, and they also all wanted to fetch a Christmas tree. And now we skip forward to later that same afternoon, and Crystal was discovered alone, standing in front of a Kmart store in Spanaway, Washington. She seemed to be in a state of shock and was mostly silent. Attempts to find her parents in the store proved fruitless, and so Crystal was placed in temporary care after being checked over at the hospital. And the next day, her parents were officially registered as missing. Crystal was later recognised from a newspaper report by her maternal grandmother, Louise Conrad, who took her in. When both Louise and the police asked Crystal about her mummy, all she replied was, and this is a quote, "Mummy is in the trees." After this, Crystal was not considered verbal enough to say any more. Prior to this incident, about 4 months earlier, the forest where the 2 had disappeared had been the scene of 2 brutal murders, and as time wore on, police began to wonder if there was a connection. On the 18th of February 1986, 2 months after the couple's disappearance, Diana Robertson's body was discovered on a logging road off State Route 7. Her partially decomposed body was found lying in the snow close to Mike's pickup truck. A Riemer was still missing. It seems Crystal was accurate about Mummy being in the trees. Diana was found nude from the waist up, and it was later established that she had been stabbed 17 times. She also had a kind of tubular sock tied around her neck. And this was strangely similar to one of the other murders 4 months earlier, where the female victim, Ruth Cooper, had a similar sock around her neck. Her companion at the time, Stephen Harkin, had been shot in the head. As I said before, Riemer was nowhere to be found, but there was a note on a manila envelope saying, "I love you, Diana." This was found in the vehicle and was thought to be in Riemer's handwriting. Blood was also found on the truck seat. Because of this, and because Mike was still missing, he initially fell under suspicion for Diana's murder and possibly the 2 earlier murders. In addition, Mike had a history of domestic violence with Diana, and this was enough for police to issue a warrant for his arrest. But despite this, the case went cold as Riemer was found to have no solid motive to kill Diana. We now have to fast forward to 2011, many years later. Some hikers discovered a partial skull in an area less than a mile from where Diana's body was found. Dental records identified it as that of Mike Riemer, although the cause of death could not be determined. Some people speculated that Mike may also have been a victim of the same killer who murdered Diana and the 2 earlier victims, but without more evidence, a full conclusion may never be found. Their daughter Crystal remained with her grandmother, and it can only be hoped that time will help to heal the terrible mental scars of whatever that little girl may have witnessed. But something like that can change a child, and so we only have exactly that: hope. My final unsolved case today is about a little girl called Laura Bradbury, aged 3.5. On the 18th of October 1984, Laura went missing from the Indian Cove campground in the Joshua Tree National Park, California, in the USA. Her parents, Patty and Michael, were regular visitors to the park, and at home, as a family of 5, they lived in a cramped 2-bedroomed accommodation, so the wide open space of the park was a lovely break for them. On that day, Laura and her 8-year-old brother, Travis, had gone to the portable restrooms, where Laura waited outside while Travis used the facility. But when Travis came out, Laura was gone. Travis immediately ran back to his parents. The alarm was raised, and eventually over 250 people massed to search the park for the child. A bloodhound was brought in and followed what appeared to be flip-flop trails for a couple of miles before losing the scent. Now, this search went on for 3 days before it was sadly called off. After this, the family continued the search effort by distributing flyers and t-shirts with Laura's likeness on them, and also by appearing on radio and TV. In fact, there were at least 2 TV reenactments of the disappearance. These made Laura's disappearance a national story, and she also became one of the first missing children to have her likeness featured on milk cartons. For those of you who are unaware, at one time in the United States, if children went missing, they used to print their likeness on milk cartons. Part of the rationale was that families used the milk cartons at breakfast, and they might recollect seeing the child, and it publicised the fact that the child was missing. I understand now that this practice may have ceased, but if I'm wrong about that, perhaps some of you might let me know in the comments below. A few witnesses reported seeing a man in about his 50s on the campground before the little girl's disappearance. He was said to have a metallic blue van, and a similar man was seen hours later at a place called Burns Canyon. Now, sheriffs even went to the extent of bringing in a hypnotist to try to get more details from these witnesses, who saw what they said was this bearded and pot-bellied man with the blue van. Mike Bradbury eventually became frustrated with the efforts of the sheriff's department, who he considered were not doing enough to find Laura. Perhaps this was just a traumatised father who had lost his daughter sounding off. It might also be because he came upon rumours about 2 men called Clifford LaVille and Toby Santangelo. Now, these men appeared not to be directly involved in the kidnap of Laura, but they did say to the sheriffs that they had good information about it. Allegedly, the sheriff's department investigated the lead, but it seems they found it to be a dead end. Strangely, the turn of events was that not long after, LaVille and Santangelo were both found shot to death. Who knows what they knew and whether it could have been substantiated. No arrests have ever been made in this case, and tragically in 1986 a skull was found by hikers near the park's west entrance, just a few miles from the family's campsite. Initially, DNA tests were inconclusive, but in 1990 new, more sophisticated tests were concluded to have identified the skull as Laura's with a 99% certainty. Having had little choice but to accept this, the Bradburys were reported at that time to have moved out of the area, both to grieve and to give their 2 remaining children a new start in life. Our hearts cannot fail but to go out to all of the relatives and friends of the victims in these cases. And with that, I would ask you to stay curious and stay safe. And thank you for watching.